Roger Glenn. Welcome.
Good to be here. Good to be here, Lena.
You are an amazing musician, and you play 18 plus instruments, and obviously you're not the only musician in your family.
That's correct. I should also clarify that, yes, 18 instruments, but it's categories also. I mean, like I play, as you saw there, flute, I play piccolo, I play alto flute, bass flute, and I play saxophones, I play soprano, alto, tenor, baritone saxes, play clarinet, bass clarinet, oboe, vibraphone, marimbas, various Latin hand percussion instruments. So when you add it all up, yeah, that's 18 instruments, but I couldn't sit and you know, I play some guitar and some bass and stuff like that, but I would have to clone myself in order to be like a symphony orchestra, you know, like a 60-piece orchestra. You know, it consists of violins, cellos, violas, bass, trumpets, trombones, things of that nature. So it's, yes, it's a lot of instruments, to carry, but...
a very, very busy musician and also composer.
Yes, that was, matter of fact, that was an original composition of mine. Roger's Samba is the name of that.
You played with a lot of famous musicians also. Dizzy Gillespie?
Yes.
Just to mention one?
Yeah, Dizzy. Recorded with Dizzy also. We went a tour also down to South America and various other places. We've played at the Monterey Jazz Festival, different things of that nature, but yeah.
And Tito Puentes Jr.
Yeah, well, I used to work also, I did a thing with his father also, as a matter of fact. We did, in New York, we did Latin versions of American commercials, like, you know, for radio. And so Tito, the father, hired me to work with him on doing various commercials. One was like, I remember, there was Lipton tea in New York, you know, that was a very popular tea, and they had a musical thing that goes, good, good, Lipton tea, da da da, good, you know. So that was how it was done normally, you know, and you hear on regular American TV, but they were also wanting to make it for Latin stations. So, you know, it was like with a more of a Latin feel, and Tito would do those good, but da 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 da, but da 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 da, you know. So it's just in terms of people making those things.
I listened to some of your pieces, and I really was surprised. Not surprised, but I said, wow, sounds like Carl Jeter. You wrote some music honoring him, his music, Carl Jeter.
I did. Yeah, well, that was, but I don't, we don't have any music on it, but you can look it up on
your website.
You know, well, actually, you'll be able to hear it later on when I have my CD coming out, which is about my Latin heart, and I call it Cal's Guajira, which is like sort of a cha-cha kind of feel.
Yeah, because your music, I listen to your music, and the sound, it's like sometimes the Brazilian samba, sometimes it's like the Cuban vibes.
Yeah.
It's a really Latin jazz, but different ones.
Yeah,
you're amazing.
You'll hear a clip that I'm sure we'll play of. It's called Libertango from Piazzolla, you know, which is
Piazzolla, yes.
Argentinian. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's listen to a little of that right now. Here's what it is. Libertango. I hope you enjoyed that. But what it really shows, my motivation basically is more in regards to music of the Americas, and also the history of how music developed here in the Americas. When I say the Americas, because it's not only jazz here in the United States, but it's also music from Cuba, Puerto Rico, music from Mexico, music from Central America, music from South America, you know, where we're talking about Brazilian music, samba versus bossa nova, you know, which means new music, new beat.
Yes, and your music, your composition includes all these vibes.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's, well, I think your father had an amazing influence on your, on you becoming a musician. Also, your brother was a musician.
Yeah.
Your grandmother is a violinist.
Yeah. Well,
so what a family.
An interesting clip which we'll show right now. This is my father and me when I was like 6 or 7, and I was playing some marimbas. I grew up around music. Vibraphone, which is one of the instruments that I play, which you'll see in another clip, that is always around the house. My father used to put the vibraphones next to the crib. I remember playing, you know, off of them. So, you know, they were always around the house. So I grew up in music, obviously. My grandmother, an interesting thing, my grandmother passed very early. For me, I was like about 2 or 3 years old, so I just have some memories of her. But interesting thing, she played violin, and she had a all-women's band in Harlem around the 1915, 60, you know, 1920, around that time.
The golden age of Harlem jazz?
Yeah. At a place called the Lafayette Theater. There were 2 theaters in Harlem. There was the Apollo, which everybody knows, and the Lafayette Theater was the other, and they would have bands that played, you know, for the various shows that they would have, and my grandmother had an all-women's band there, and so I assumed that's what she was, just, stuff for theater and stuff like that. Recently, though, I found out while I was on tour in Europe. I was playing in Germany and in London and England, and the guy sent me an email on a documentary that he's putting together in regards to a Polish composer who left Poland in the 30s because of Hitler and wanted to escape all that. And he was a Jewish composer, came to the United States, and landed in New York, and he wanted to put together an orchestra with African American musicians, and it was a symphonic orchestra. And my grandmother was a concert master with that. I have an image which we'll insert right now, and she. This is an aspect of her that I really didn't know. That she was doing that, and plus the fact that growing up around my father, who was a very famous jazz musician, the emphasis was basically about jazz. And my brother, who also is a musician, Tyree Glenn Jr., he plays saxophone, but he grew up, he's older than me, he grew up in an era where it was like the start of rhythm and blues and stuff like that. He had a group, as a matter of fact, he used to play at a place in New York called the Peppermint Lounge, which was a very famous rock and roll R&B place. There's a documentary on the Beatles going to see my brother when they first came to the United States. So, he's more into the rock and R&B thing, from James Brown to his own thing. So we just, we all went in all our different directions. But with me, it was also, my mother loved Gloria Glenn. My mother loved Latin music also, aside from liking jazz. And so that's sort of how I started listening more to Latin music, because, we're talking about the 50s and 60s, early 60s, where in New York was popular mambo, cha-cha-cha, the Palladium. You mentioned Tito Puente, who used to play there. So there was that, as well as, growing up around jazz. My father worked with Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, and then later on Louis Armstrong. And so, there's that jazz influence. There was the introduction of Latin music through my mother, and so that
and
my brother, yeah,
emphasis.
Because my brother had a band, in New York, and he used to play at various places. Trudy Heller's, the Peppermint Lounge. When he was at the Peppermint Lounge, who was they had back then Go-Go Girls, where they, one of the Go-Go Girls was Goldie Hawn.
That's very interesting to know. Very.
Yeah, yeah.
What about your father? You told me, just mentioned that your father was one of the first people with his band to go to Europe to play jazz after World War II.
Exactly, yeah. And he stayed there for a couple of years also. playing there. But yeah, there was a band with a guy named Don Redman, and some of the people who were also in that band. Trying to think of the pianist's name. I can't think offhand, but I mean, it was essentially a jazz band coming to Germany, which was, and Sweden also. They were all, the Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, France.
Europeans love jazz. They really do.
Yeah.
There are great jazz festivals, all around Europe. And a question, well, not a question. Tell us a little bit of your experience with Dizzy Gillespie, that he has that strange trumpet. And
oh, yeah. Well, you know how that came about also? Actually, somebody sat on his trumpet.
But
they put it, he put it on a chair, and the guy sat down, and so the bell went up. But he comically says he used to have it where it would go up in the air, because when he played down south, the blacks had to sit in the balcony, so he was playing up to them. But yeah, Dizzy's an interesting person in regards to history of the music, because I've known, obviously, before him is Louis Armstrong, and Dizzy created another direction in regards to bebop. But Dizzy and my father used to work together with Cab Calloway, when Dizzy was like 19, starting off. And so what's interesting about that moment, when they were working together with Cab, my father, Dizzy, and there was another guy named Mario Bowser, who was he was a Cuban American who was in the band playing saxophone, and Mario was married to a woman named Graciela, who was the sister of Machito, who had a big band, big Afro-Cuban band, and so Mario would invite the members of the band, Cab's band, to hear Machito's band, and the only one who really got it was Dizzy, who really, found it very interesting, and from that sparked interest with Dizzy to learn more about Cuban music, and he put together a band that he hired this Cuban conguero, a guy named Chano Pozo, and they composed some music, one that is a very Latin jazz standard.
Yeah, I heard your music, and actually your Cuban jazz vibes reminds me of the Buena Vista Social Club, kind of.
Yeah. I mean,
I love that.
It has the roots, but that's the thing about music in the Americas in general. My feelings and knowledge of the music is, music of the Americas is a combination mainly of music from Africa and music from Europe, and those influences coming together, creating a totally different form of music. So there's European classical music, there is African sensibilities of music, there's a song, Amazing Grace, how sweet it is. It is alleged that the guy who composed that, you look it up and you'll see that it says lyrics by James Newton, melody traditional or unknown, because usually in a song there's the guy who creates the melody and another person who writes the lyrics, and so he wrote the lyrics, but the melody they referenced that he thought it was basically from African influences, because it's even though he was a former slave owner, slave ship captain, I should say. because you listen to the lyrics and it says, "Amazing Grace, how sweet the song. I once was lost, being a slave ship captain, and now I've found." He gave it up, but he realized, this song that he wrote the lyrics to allegedly was what he heard on the slave ship of the Africans in the ship humming this melody, da 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 da, which is in musical terms a pentatonic, based off a pentatonic scale. Ba do da do da do da do da, ba da da do do da do da do da. So it's this influence of an African melody with a European a collaboration of using that, and you see that in music of, like, we talk about jazz. If we go through the history of jazz or music in from blues and rock and roll and all that, it is a combination initially of music from Africa and Europe, and the music of the United States and of the Americas in general could not have been created without the input of Europeans as well as Africans. Talk about samba, bossa nova, that's in Brazil, how that came together in regards to Africans and Europeans. We'll play one thing that I do is a song from Argentina, Piazzolla, Libertango, and that has influences of how rhythmically it was brought together in regards to what we call clave, because there's this, and as well as a European input. So
I heard Amazing Grace being played also with classic music,
correct.
Blues sound, and jazz.
Exactly.
And what I love of jazz is that it expands your horizon, also musically, because you can use different rhythms, different sounds, and make it into jazz. It's like some Argentinian, some Brazilian, some Cuban.
Yeah.
And that's why nowadays it's so fascinating to listen to ethnic jazz.
Well, the other thing about jazz in regards to the cultures that have come about, and you look at the roots of those cultures, I like to say, one of the things is European music is more written out, structured, in that sense, versus African music has been more about being in the moment. And
more vocal also.
Well, there's
the
that,
rhythm is,
but the thing is, I think what's really important to know is that how those things manifest themselves in regards to music in general. I mean, Europe had that kind of being in the moment. The culture was like that, but I think there are other aspects that sort of changed the discipline. You know, religious aspects that came about. You know, a lot of music was made in churches. Classical, you know, that was also to get these heathens, heathens into the church, and so the church hired a lot of composers, you know, the Bach, you know, Mozart, you know, people like that, and you know, the church was more had more of a say-so in regards to what music was supposed to be, whereas African culture was more about being in the moment and creating stuff, you know, an oral tradition versus a written language tradition in Europe. And so also the structure of it, a lot of African music is about call and response. And you hear that in a lot of Latin music where there's a person singing, and there's like a chorus of people where they call a section in Latin music choral inspiration. So the chorus is singing, and then the individual singer is inspired doing something in the moment.
What's the most interesting part of jazz for you?
Being in the moment. I mean, the thing about jazz, which is so universal, is that you can create a melody, and you know the structure is that people will play that melody, but after that they go into improvisation based off of that melody, and so that's being in the moment. Whereas a lot of European classical music has been about you know, total structure, you know, written out totally. There are moments in classical music, certain types of classical music, where there's the individual can express themselves. That's usually called like a cadenza, where they, you know, this is me. This is to show you my versatility.
Would you try to play Mozart, a piece of Mozart, turn into jazz? You can do that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been done. What is that famous? What was that famous pop hit that was based off of Beethoven's Fifth? Ba-da-da-da,
Yes.
with a disco beat.
Yeah, that's true.
Da-da-da-da, you know, so I mean, you know, it's whatever inspires a person, but it's the structure that gives people the liberties of how they want to present themselves, you know, rhythmically. You know, that's what, you know, Beethoven didn't have a disco beat in mind when he was composing that for a symphony, you know, and stuff like that. And so there's this crossover of different cultures in terms of music, and let alone we haven't even talked about indigenous music in the Americas, or Asian input into the possibilities with jazz. So these different cultures have their standards, but with jazz, it's a matter of bringing all that in, even instrumentations. I mean, I've done things where there's been like Indian music, musicians involved in regards to the music, or from Japan, using codas and stuff like that. You know, every culture has made an input in regards to, when we were just speaking about jazz, in one form or another.
Next project, future projects?
Well, the next project is the release of this album, which is about My Latin Heart, which is more of a Latin thing, but it covers different things. I mean, there's one song that I have called Congo Square, which I feel is sort of for the United States. Here was there's a place in New Orleans called Congo Square, where the slaves were permitted to play their drums only on a Sunday, and they would get together in New Orleans at a place called Congo Square. And the rhythms that came out there and the music that started to blend in with European culture was sort of the creation of jazz. I mean, Louis Armstrong was from New Orleans, and how that music and rhythms went, from New Orleans up to Chicago and New York and various other places, and how that developed. But some of the early roots of this music, was New Orleans. When you combine that with some of the traditional European band marches and stuff like that, why did he pick trumpet? Because there was these brass bands and stuff like that out of New Orleans, and the rest is history.
Beautiful history of jazz, beautiful stories about history and culture.
Yeah.
And we have to end here, but I know you can talk about jazz and music for days and days, so you might be back. Thank you to everybody. Ciao, to the next time.
Ciao, Bella.